Hey there, YouTube, or people in general. This is Derek McDaniel. I just had quite an engaging conversation with a family member about taxes. So I wanted to share a little bit of that conversation with all of you. Um, so, as you are probably well aware, I like having discussions and conversations, maybe even debates a lot with libertarian type, Austrian school types. And the reason why I think I do is because I do relate to a lot of their complaints and grievances. Um, Specifically with regards to ideas such as unintended consequences, sometimes there is regulation that doesn't help the way it was intended to. Um, Sometimes these things don't have the effect they are supposed to. So today we're just going to talk about that a little bit. Um, Now, at the same time, one of the problems I see with libertarian thought is they aren't able to prioritize what things will actually improve our quality of life and freedom if we give people more personal freedoms. But there are definitely ways in which personal freedoms end up being restricted in a way that harms people. Like how high housing costs are probably one of the best examples of this that I can think of. So today we're going to talk about what taxes are. This is just a simple way to think about taxes, conceptualize taxes. It doesn't even get into the nuance of um, different levels of government and how they tax differently. But broadly speaking, we are going to define taxation as the cost that you have to pay in order for other people to recognize your claims to property. So, one of the most interesting issues in discussing economics and discussing policy is what is property? Where does property come from in the first place? Now, in the libertarian and Austrian view, there's this idea called labor mixing, where this is sort of a moral basis for property, where if you work on something, if you work land or something, then that means it should belong to you. So, by applying your labor, by developing something, you create something, and then you have ownership of that. So that's a moral conceptualization of property. Um, but this is subject to a lot of debate, and obviously, there is a consideration with regards to a historical pedigree of who got that property first and is just being first enough. And this is one of the reasons why I want to define taxation. And that is so we can talk about property in more than just this chicken and egg fashion, whether if someone got to something first and was able to establish their claim first, then they're the owner. Now, there is a lot of benefit to having some historical continuity or some continuity of property rights. And as you will see in this discussion, that is generally achieved and recognized by most uh, political systems involved with property to an extent. But yeah, we're just going to define taxes as whatever you have to do for others to recognize your property rights. So, again, this is just a very general view, not getting into nuances between income tax, tariffs, like all those specificities. We are going to leave those out for the moment and just be like, hey, you pay a tax so you can say, I own this thing, I own this land, and no one else can use it without my permission. No one else can come here, use this space without my permission. So, um, regardless of the moral questions, there's a practical issue of how you're going to define that. Now, you may like if the legal rules follow have some moral basis, but that is a different consideration. So practically, we're going to have laws that define who owns what, They may have a moral basis. They may be arbitrary. They may be cultural. Either way, you have these laws. Now, if you are out in a state of nature, so I do want to bring up this issue real quick. A lot of times we talk about the origins of some concepts like money or property or law or society, hierarchies. We like to talk about these origins because these are ever present things. It's like a fish swimming in water. So if we are able to talk about the origins of some of these ideas, it will help us think about the transition. And just like a fish will have a hard time understanding what it means to be in water, it's hard for us to understand what it means to live in a society with law unless we are able to think about that transition, able to have a contrast, um, and conjecture about historical transitions allows us to think about these issues more clearly. But overall, the point is not necessarily the history. The point is understanding what role these things play in our lives today, and only by having a contrast are we able to clearly articulate how that works. So with property, we might imagine a hunter-gatherer society with no property, um, pre-agricultural, and we might conjecture that once people started engaging in agriculture, they wanted to claim land, and then that's when property rights emerged rather than just simply possessions. Um, and so, yeah. So, what happens when two people both try to claim the same thing? We can think about our society today or an early society with when agriculture was brand new. Well, you're going to have either courts or some type of system to adjudicate these claims to do this, and all this comes with a cost. It it either costs your time to try to claim something, but even if we aren't just talking about convincing people, let's say you want to defend your land from the intrusions of others. Well, then you have to like build fences, you have to do all these things. So there's all these practical aspects to defending claims, but when you have a system of government and taxation that makes it clear what you have to do in order to have a legitimate claim and the obligation to retain that claim. So people have to pay property taxes to retain their claim to property. And with that comes certain protections. How well those protections work out is debatable. That's can be variable. Um, you're, each of us have certain expectations in terms of law enforcement to recognize our rights, and in the court of law that our own property will be recognized as belonging to us. But in either case, there are costs associated with having a claim to property. And what having a government and taxation does is it lowers that cost rather than going around to every single person in your community and trying to sign a contract with each one of them. You have an overarching social contract, being like, okay, we all respect each other's claims and it's adjudicated through this judicial system. Now, not saying every society that governs itself needs to have government, but I do legitimately believe that government can be an effective way to do that. And for many societies, especially as you get larger and larger, this is a great benefit. Now, people often complain about taxes, and especially someone who just goes to a big city and gets a shiny new job and they're going to have to pay a ton of income tax. They'll be like, hey, I'm giving all this money to the government. Now it's a crime. And if you look at how much money they're earning on paper, like, it's like, how much money would you be able to earn without a society, without um, this rule of law, without all this infrastructure around you to provide you opportunities to make wealth, establish legal boundaries for who owns what and does what. So these top marginal tax earners, it's like, could you make that much money if you were growing crops? Or like, let's say you made money being cleaning bathrooms or whatever. Like, would you be efficient enough and proficient enough to make that much money doing one of these tasks, provide that equivalent amount of value? And it's really hard to justify that you would be able to have this level of wealth on your own without a society. So, and in a sense, when it comes to income tax, it's sort of a nominal reduction. Like, because government destroys the money effectively it takes in through taxation, it's only like a condition. Well, if you're going to pay someone this much, you have to actually earn, your business revenue has to be this much higher, your profit and loss. Anyway, all those things. It's almost like an equivalence statement. Like, if you hire one person at this salary, you could hire this many people for lower salaries. And what an income tax does is make it less efficient to hire fewer people and pay them more. Because when you get a higher marginal tax rate, then let's say your effective tax rate is 30%, then you're only 70% of the money you're paying as wages actually ends up going to the earners. So if you paid people less at a 10% marginal rate, let's say you hire one person at $100,000 at an effective 30% tax rate, you could hire 10 people at $10,000, but if their effective tax rate was 10%, then you could hire 9 for that same amount of money. So it sort of changes the trade-off between hiring more people and paying them less, and hiring fewer people and paying them more. But it makes it cheaper, it makes it more relatively effective to hire more people and pay them less. That's what a marginal tax does. That's pretty much because it doesn't raise revenue for government. It just makes it more efficient for businesses to hire more people and pay them less money, relatively. But yeah, I just want to reiterate that main point I was talking about. That property, the point of a tax is to define what someone must do to defend their property, and having taxes makes that clear. It allows you to have more wealth. The privilege of paying tax is a function of how wealthy we are, that we own so many things that we would need to pay tax on so much. Because even without any government defined, you still have to have property claims and convince other people not to intrude on your claims. And without a government, it would be impossible, virtually impossible, to have such a degree of wealth that we have today. So that's the point I wanted to make. And yeah, I'm just going to try to keep these live sessions short, short and sweet. And so I'm going to wrap that up for today. Thanks for watching.